Hello there. Welcome to the episode 29 of Take It EV. Couple of things before I start. Please do have a look at the Take It EV Twitter. If you're active on Twitter, do give us a follow at Take It EV, just like the podcast name. I would like to encourage everyone to have a look at the Patreon. Just chuck us at £2 a month. Again, patreon.com/takeitev, it's in the show notes. I've recently kind of appeared quickly on Leona Graham's Rock and Road podcast to do with just explaining various charging standards to non-EV drivers or perhaps hybrid drivers who are just dipping their toes in an electric world. So when that comes out, do check it out. I'll probably share it on the Twitter, as I mentioned. I don't have anything to say. Today's podcast is going to be on the longer side compared to the previous episodes, but I make no claims as to like how long the episodes are going to be. I sat down with an iPace owner who has been very active in their community, so I just wanted to pick his brains on, various sort of iPace related issues and qualities and whatnot. So if you're interested in that sort of a thing, give us a listen. I was just about to say read. Give us a listen, and do go to your podcatcher of choice and give us a 5-star rating or something, please, because I've been slipping through down through the charts because nobody does it apparently, unless you ask them. So please. And now, without further ado, episode 29 of Take It EV, and I'll leave you with Gary. Today we got someone on the podcast who belongs to the elite group of EV drivers that are very proud of their cars, and everyone envies them their car in some ways. And no, if you thought we are going to be talking about Teslas, nope. In the words of the great Top Gear, this car is, and I quote, "won't be for everyone, but hats off for making a car that steps boldly into the unknown and shows those pesky Germans the way." I am, of course, talking about Jaguar iPace, and I got one such lucky person here with me today. Gary, hi.
Hi, Greg. Thanks for having me on. So I run the iPace Owner YouTube channel, and I'm pretty active in the iPace group as well. Had my iPace now for nearly 3 years. Actually coming up to the time when the lease ends, so I've got to make a decision at the end of at the start of next year whether I carry on with the iPace or I'll go to something else. So maybe we'll talk about that a bit later. But yeah, so I've been doing that. I've been driving one for a while now and enjoying every moment of it.
It is a truly astonishing car, just the way it looks and the way it drives. Yeah, I had about 10 minutes in one, so
yeah. I often say to people, yes, a Tesla can go faster in a straight line, absolutely. I don't think anything can go around corners as quickly as an iPace, which is electric at the moment. There may be some coming out now, the Taycan, and then the Audi might be getting close. But because of the torque steering and all the stuff they put into the steering, vector steering, it's just so good at taking corners. It's brilliant for country, twisty roads. It's just really good for that. I mean, it has its foibles, and it hasn't moved on as much as I would like. I mean, I think Jaguar had quite a good head start over a lot of the market and have probably let that slip a bit. But it's still a very good car today. And it's only now that there's cars coming out which really compete with it, to my mind.
It is a 4-wheel drive car, and because it's electric, obviously, like you said, the low sort of center of gravity makes it very good cornering. And it's indeed, they always say that American cars are good in a straight line, but when it comes to cornering, they don't seem to be designed for that sort of purpose. I'm sure I'm going to get emails from Tesla owners, but I can attest to the fact that Jaguar I-Pace actually handles very well. I only had a brief test drive in one just around the sort of the local villages, but let's just say that the salesperson was warning me about where the potential mobile speed cameras are.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I've got nothing against Teslas either, and I've had Teslas before on hire before. I actually drove to Germany in a Tesla Model S and in Holland to Model X. So I've had quite a experience of driving them and love them as well. Really nice cars to drive in. There's something different about the I-Pace, and I think, and it does, as you're right, it's a car which doesn't suit everybody. For some people, don't like the styling of it, particularly the front grille, which is actually pretty clever. I mean, the whole slotted grille with the gap under the bonnet to allow airflow, which basically gives you a lot of downforce, again helping that grip round corners. But the other thing about the I-Pace is the off-road ability. I mean, people don't realise just how good an off-roader it is. It's got a lot of Land Rover underpinnings on it. In fact, I think initially the prototype was actually going to be in a Land Rover before they decided to make it a Jaguar. So you still see some Land Rover parts on it if you look underneath. And it's got the things like the air suspension, which is really good. I mean, you can go through very deep puddles in it. I've certainly, when we had the local floods around here, I was the only person that had to get in anyway, which is really good, and you raise it up quite high. So all those things are really good, and I think that's it's definite advantages. I think there's some disadvantages with it. I think the charging on it has been a problem. Compatibilities on some chargers. I know there's always the argument whether it's the charge point operator's equipment or it's the car. And we could talk we probably could talk for weeks on the CCS standard and why it's not really a good standard. But certainly with the I-Pace that has been an issue, particularly up in Scotland. I know my friend David Dude, who runs another I-Pace channel, has had a lot of problems with the earlier e-volt chargers up in Scotland. What we Scarco now, built on Charge Place Scotland, and there was a compatibility issue there, which actually has now been fixed and was fixed on the charger end, so probably wasn't the car. But it's so difficult to get these things sorted out, and certainly initially, the first 6 months of having my car, it was actually difficult to find a charger which worked with it properly. Had quite a few issues with that. They did resolve those, and they put loads of updates out. And we've had lots of over-the-air updates. We had updates and put it in the garage as well at the dealers, and things like the range of my car has increased by about 30 miles since I had it, just through the updates in terms of how far I can actually go in one charge. Charging speed has increased as well. Not as much as I'd like, and I think that's one of the issues with it. It's a big battery, it takes a long time to charge, which when you're on a long journey, yes, you can do 230 miles, and then you've got to wait to get it to charge up. And I'd like it to be charging a bit faster, but that's I mean, in the UK, 230 miles is at least 3 hours driving, and that's a long time. You need a break after that anyway.
Yep. You can from where I live, you can get to pretty much edge of Wales. I'm in Tunbridge. That's 230 miles, sort of roughly, to Aberystwyth. I've done that trip many times. So
and I'd never actually take it the full 230 miles anyway. I tend to charge. I try to charge when I'm around about 30-40%, because that's a good point on the charging curve to actually charge it. Up 80 and then go on again, and it works. I mean, it's great for journeys. I mean, I took a trip from Peterborough to Manchester last week and didn't have to actually charge until I got there, and basically used destination charging. So it's a really practical car for getting around on those, and it's got reasonable space in it. I do find the shape of the boot sometimes restricts you in what you can actually get in. Sometimes we've also got a MG ZS EV here, and sometimes that's a smaller boot. I can sometimes actually get more into it because of the shape of it. So that's one thing which is maybe less so. But do you buy something like an I-Pace for practicality? Though it is a very car.
Yeah, indeed. I've seen I've seen the I was invited to one of the sort of reveals at the local Jaguar place, and I was actually very happy with the styling. Mm-hmm. It probably wouldn't be the car I would buy myself at this stage in my life, because of the cost reasons. But I was looking forward actually to even test driving it, and I was kind of disappointed that I think that slipped for a couple of months before I got a chance. But it was worth the wait. I don't understand people who kind of don't like the styling of it, because it's if there's one thing that Jaguar can do very well is the sort of the styling of the car. It's the kind of bread and butter. I'm not so sure about Land Rovers personally. To me they're ugly. They're just bricks that are slightly curved. But but Jaguars are always, even the bigger ones, are just very beautiful pieces of sort of engineering and styling. If you ask me.
Yeah.
When it comes, I wasn't aware of the fact that it was supposed to be potentially a Range Rover or Land Rover offering, and of its 4x4 sort of off-road capabilities. That's interesting. I wonder how many people actually decided to take it and test those claims in practice.
I doubt very many. That's not the sort of thing you tend to do with a Jaguar. I certainly have. I've just through circumstance I've had to. Sort of flooding was on one area. Got caught up in a fairly nasty blizzard one day. Which tested its ability on snow and ice, and it did exceptionally well. And I've done some European trips, sort of up to the north of Europe, where it's definitely cold and chilly. So it's definitely proved its worth in that respect. Well, I think one thing that's interesting on the styling is you can see how influential the iPace has been. If you just look at what the cars which are out there at the moment. I mean, there's so many what I would call iPace clones. You've got the Mustang Mach-E, which is very iPace-like. The EV6, which is again very iPace-like. So there's a lot of people picking up on that styling cue and using it. I think there's a whole sort of area of the market. It's really difficult to actually classify what these things are, because they're not really SUVs. They're too low to be SUVs. I know they call them CUVs or crossovers, whatever. I mean, they're basically giant hatchbacks. That's what they are. They're hatchbacks which have grown a bit, but they're sporty ones, fastbacks maybe.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, because everyone associates SUVs with practical sort of day-to-day cars, which I don't know. I'm not a big fan of SUVs, but the reality of it is these things seem to sell very well, and that's what people are buying. So we have loads of them on the road, even though the people don't usually tend to use common sense and logic. They just follow the other people's kind of opinions most of the time, and that's what happens on the road anyway. But I always joke that whenever I meet an iPace driver at a charger or a meetup, it's usually a retired gentleman or close to the retirement age, or a gentleman who just wanted to have a fun Jaguar to drive around, and a car that's still practical.
Yeah, I think
enough to take a family out. If
you actually got a group, if you look to our group on the iPace forums and Facebook group, there's several areas of demographics. You have got the more elderly person who's retired and's got the finance to afford something, and this is an EV they could live with. I think is a good way of explaining it. Then you've got a lot of company car drivers. I'm a company car driver, mine, because of the tax benefits and the fact that the contract hire rates were actually quite attractive and very attractive at the moment. And iPace, because the residuals are very good. Certainly, when I got mine with the company, the residuals hadn't really been established, so the contract hire rates were pretty high, and that's quite common with new EVs because they just don't know what they're going to retain. But nowadays, you can get some incredibly good contract hire rates, and of course, you've then got the tax benefits as a company car driver, which means it becomes a very cheap car to actually run if you are a company car driver.
Yeah. Especially if you're doing a lot of mileage.
Yeah, especially if you're doing a lot of mileage. So I think that's one area. And you've also got a lot, and again, similarly to the company car side, there's a couple of salary sacrifice schemes, fairly big ones, and you find a lot of doctors and senior NHS staff have got iPaces as well. That's another area we see a lot of people in our group from.
Interesting.
So I mean, it's a fairly widespread. And there are some pretty young people in our group as well. It's not all retirees. But
no, I was joking that the maybe it's just it tells you about. I usually drive sort of around the time when younger people are at work.
Well, I don't think it is fair to say that if you want to own an iPace and you're not going to get it through the company, then you do have to have a fair degree of disposable income to be able to do that. I don't place myself in that thing. Mine was basically because of the tax breaks on the car. And when I'm actually the first episode I ever did on my channel, on the iPace owner channel, was explaining why I got the iPace. And at the time, it was the only car which fitted the spec I needed. I had a certain sort of quite a set of requirements, certain distance I needed to be able to travel, and the amount of space I needed to be able to carry at the time. I don't actually carry as much as I did then. And although I complain about the boot size, when you put the seats down in the back, it's huge. So you do get a lot. You can carry a lot of stuff in that respect. So it was one of the practicalities was it had to fit my garage, which none of the Teslas did, because I could probably gone for a Model S if it would have fitted the bill as well, but it wouldn't fit my garage. It's just too wide.
Interesting.
Because it was the standardised garages from the 1960s, which are quite narrow, and the iPace only just fitted. It was a tight.
I am sitting in one that's been converted into my office, so I can attest to the fact that they probably wouldn't be wide enough for a Model S.
Well, I mean that's a general thing. I mean, parking spaces as well. I mean the iPace is sometimes difficult to get into conventional parking spaces because of the fact that they're all designed around cars from the 1950s. And cars, and it's not really the iPace's fault. Remember, all modern cars are a lot wider than their older counterparts because of their safety features. Once you stop and say side curtain airbags in, you take a lot more room up. It's
indeed, and also the fact that Teslas are designed for American sort of requirements, so they're pushing things a little bit more than.
There are areas in London you can't get a Model X through because they're too wide for the barriers. Which I don't. But a Model X is a lovely car, but it is designed for American roads.
Yes, yeah.
So I think that's interesting. I mean, one of the things I did find with the iPace is actually it's surprisingly easier to manoeuvre than I thought it was going to be, and that's primarily because it's very flat-sided. Once the handles have got in, it's very easy to manoeuvre. I might have had a couple of incidents over the years. When I first got it, one of the problems with the iPace has been the entertainment system, and it's a lot better now, and I'm quite happy with it now. But in the early days, it was very laggy, very very slow, and the version on. So there's been two versions of the entertainment system. So the pre-2021 cars or 2020 cars, I think, had the entertainment system called Touch Duo, and the new ones have a thing called PB Pro. And I've got the older version, and that's now good. I mean, they've improved it, but in the early days it was incredibly laggy, and particularly on the cameras. And I didn't realise there was like a 4-second lag on the camera, so I just reversed straight into a lamppost because I thought I had loads of room. I didn't, so that was a bit embarrassing and a bit annoying. And the other incident I did have was, and this was my own silly fault, was manoeuvring in a car park, and I went through a gap I normally get through quite happily, and then decided that I wanted to move the car. Forgot that the door handles would have popped out, so I caught the door handles because it was a tighter gap than I could actually get through with the door handles out. So that was silly. That's a modern world problem. You don't know. Most people would judge their car based on where the door handles normally are, and of course, because they do go flush on the sides, which is great for them. Like the Teslas as well have that, and it does help with the aerodynamics. But I mean, it's not something that most people think about because most cars have static door handles. I can think about Model S obviously, and the I don't know if you've seen the new Ioniq 5. Yes, indeed. Yeah,
that has the door handles that pop out as well.
Yeah,
and I can't really think of any other cars that have the same feature.
As well, which obviously is based on the same door handles as the Ioniq 5's got.
Okay.
It's just a car.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, but there's not many. There's not many which do that. I mean, there's some ICE cars which have those pop-out handles, but it's a rare thing, and it's not something I wasn't used to. It is great, and it does certainly make it a lot easier to get through gaps when you've got the handles in, because they certainly don't take up anywhere near as much room.
So there's certainly this. There's a question that everyone's going to be asking themselves, and certainly I do, is like, so would if you didn't have one for the last couple of years, would you go and buy it now, or are there any rumors about any?
Yeah, this is actually a big question for me at the moment, because I said my car is due to be replaced in February, and at the moment I actually can't get an iPace which I would match my requirements because of the component shortage. So I mean, there's certain things I like to have in my cars. Head-up display, for an example. I do like the head-up display, and you can't actually get an iPace with that at the moment unless you're prepared to wait a year. So I'm not going to be able to get a new one with that spec. And I should have probably planned a bit more for this, but you just don't think about those things. I mean, I've allowed 6 months in advance. That's the sort of normal lead time on cars. And I should have probably allowed a bit longer. So I'm thinking about that. And what do I do? I can extend the iPace, and that's one option. I've also looked at a couple of other cars. I've mentioned the EV6 because I've looked at that pretty closely, and I think that's a really good iPace competitor. I don't know what the handling is going to be like, but they do say they've tweaked it quite a lot to make it work. It's a lovely looking car. It looks very iPace-like. And I know some people sort of would say about the boot on the EV6, because it has got a quite strange boot design. I have to say it looks a lot better in person than it did on photos.
Indeed, yeah.
Press it on photos, but when I actually saw it in reality, I actually thought, okay, that's all right. And it's got some bits I really like. I mean, I like the positioning of the charge port on it. The position of the charge port in the iPace is really awkward at times, being on the side with certainly with some of the shorter charging cables that certain providers have. I mean, I was at the Motor Fuel Group's new EV charging hub in Manchester last week, and that's a great place and fantastic, sort of like petrol station without petrol. I mean, it's got all the facilities you normally have in a petrol station, but no petrol pumps. It's just chargers. And it's brilliant, but the cables on those Swarco chargers are really short, and getting them to work in the iPace means you've got to park really close to the charger. You then drag it around the side, and one of the big problems is the flap, which opens out to the front. So you've got to get the charge cable around the flap, and then plug it in, and then avoid it, and then it tends to be stretching. It's not making very good contact. So with those chargers, I actually have to hold it in to get it to charge. So that's something I find challenging with iPace, is actually sometimes getting those. Whereas obviously the EV6 on the back being on the rear part of the car is a very easy to plug in. It's not going to be difficult as long as you can reverse into its space.
Okay.
And I also liked some of the tech in the EV6 as well. I think the entertainment system in there is well ahead of what the iPace has got in terms of performance and the stuff it's got, and the head-up display as well. So that's what I am seriously considering and looking at. I think it's a really good. In fact, on our iPace driver show, which is coming out this weekend, myself and Abhidab do talk about the EV6 in quite detail, because it's definitely a very, very interesting car. So yeah, but that's one I've looked at. I did look at the Mustang Mach-E. It rejected that because it didn't quite have the iPace feel to it. I mean, there's nothing really out there which isn't like an iPace. It's all things which are quite close, but there's nothing. I mean, the reason I'm sort of considering the EV6 is it's hard to justify. Yes, it's not quite as good as the iPace, and maybe the GT version of it, when it comes out next end of next year, might be pretty close, be faster, but might actually handle as well. But I have to think to myself, is the iPace £30,000 better than the EV6? And I don't think it is.
I mean, yeah, certainly EV6 is going to be much cheaper. I've sat in one, but it was a prototype, so I didn't get a chance to drive it. Yep. I did drive Ioniq 5. I had it for 3 hours, and I posted a video, like a quick video review on my channel. And it was plenty quick, and it's got massive tires, really, really wide. I can't remember the dimensions, but they're much wider than the ones on the iPace, which sounds to me like they're there for a reason. Because certainly I'm driving Kia e-Niro at the moment, which is a plenty quick car as well. It's not obviously not iPace quick. It's a front wheel drive only, so it has all the sort of issues coming with that. Doesn't the because it's a multi energy platform, it's not designed to handle that much torque, basically. So there's plenty of times when you step on the throttle halfway and the wheels are spinning because the tires are not wide enough to handle that. I have to say, Ioniq 5 just blew my mind when it comes to performance. And that was the rear-wheel drive version. People are now receiving the four-wheel drive Project 45 versions, which are obviously what you're probably after, which is the four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, as they call it. The looks are way different to polar opposites from Jaguar. It's all very squarey, blocky, and kind of 80s feel to it. But I kind of like it personally, to be fair. But it's it's a Marmite thing.
Isn't it great? We've got this choice now. You've got some really good cars coming out, and some really good architectures coming out for EVs, and we'll maybe talk about that in a second with the Ioniq and the EV6. But we've got the choice. We've got two very different looking cars, which give you a really great EV. And back when I bought the iPace, that wasn't the case. The iPace was the only thing on the market which I actually liked. Other than some of the Teslas, but the only one which was practical and I still liked. So it's great this come on like this far, and we can actually have this choice now.
It is amazing. Like I said, since I don't own iPace, I can't really compare to other cars, but I've never spoken to anybody who would drive an iPace, who was driving an iPace and would say, "Oh, it doesn't have a big enough boot or anything like that." In fact, I think it was in the Yorkshire. I went to one of the Yorkshire meetups, and there was a gentleman there with the whole family. He was, a granddad and had, two grandkids with him and one of the other parents, and they were not complaining about the boot space or the space in the car whatsoever. And like I say, it's plenty quick. And when it comes to options on iPace, am I correct in thinking that the powertrain is always the same? It's just the trimming that changes inside the car. So
but powertrain. There are a couple of specific European countries which have some very specific reduced powertrains, but that's actually software controls. It's basically the same car underneath. And that's purely to do with tax regime, so they can fit under a certain power threshold and get different taxation. But basically, yes. So you've got the three basic models now. You've got the S, SE, and HSE, and they've all got the same powertrain, same drive system. It may not have the same suspension because the higher end have got air suspension, whereas the lower end are on springs. That can make a difference on the handling. But they've all got the torque steering. They've all got everything. The Jaguar magic, as I would call it, in terms of the car. I mean, you drive an S. It may not have all the bang gizmos in it, but it certainly drives well. It drives.
Okay.
There's quite a substantial difference in cost between the base model and the high-end model.
Of course, they must be making money somewhere. So I'm not familiar with this torque steering concept. What was the magic in that?
But it's basically using the fact you get so much torque in the wheels to adjust the torque levels between the wheels. It's not quite as clever as doing each individual wheel, but because there's motors front and back, it can adjust the differential between the two of them. It's someone described it as an electronic differential, but it's far more than that. So you can even do things like it could potentially spin the wheels backwards to get grip in the turning, and it basically means you can force you around a corner really quickly. So you can turn around corners a lot faster than you would do anywhere else. I mean, I was very lucky enough to be able to take it on a test track which had an Alpine hairpin structure, and I was allowed to go a bit faster than the people would normally be allowed to go on that. And I was actually going around with a professional driver. I wasn't actually doing the driving at the time, but I think I could. And they were taking around 80, 90 miles an hour around these hairpins, which any other car would be taking around at 20.
Okay.
So it's
Interesting.
and that was all purely down to this fact that the steering, the car is using the torque to actually maneuver, sort of change the vectoring of the car to actually get around it. So I mean, it's a simple sort of thing you can do with rear-wheel drive. I mean, and some cars. I've sort of, and if you do remember the Lightning EV, which has been touted a few years ago, that was going to have torque steering on each of its individual wheels, and you could adjust them. It's a bit like the way a tank drives in some ways. You've got the tracks going in different directions to steer very rapidly. I think
I think one car that I can think about now that is actually started production recently, today or yesterday, is the Rivian.
Yes,
R1. It has that concept that you
does,
mentioned.
and they've actually taken it further. So what they're doing is even more so than the way the iPace works. I'm looking forward a lot to see how the Rivian actually handles when I get my hands on one at some point.
Yeah, but obviously they've done it for different reasons, because it's a sort of off-roading capable vehicle that.
And I don't actually know if this. I haven't got any facts on this, but I kind of suspect that the reason we've got this great steering mechanism on the iPace is again because of the Range Rover routes, because it would have been something you need for getting out of trouble in slippery situations. Yeah,
that makes sense. So we don't know whether there's any refresh models coming out, and I personally I know you love your car, but I've got plenty of bad things to say about Jaguar and Land Rover when it comes to them not bringing things to market. Because, like you said, they, when they brought iPace, they were well ahead of any other sort of certainly European manufacturer, and we're all kind of anticipating other electric vehicles from the stables, and nothing's showed up so far. So there's been plenty of cancelled projects
by the next,
and it seems
prime one, of course, which is pretty well down the road. Although, having said that, my understanding of that is that got pulled very much between pillar and post, because it was a platform which was going to be shared between Jaguar and Range Rover, and I think Range Rover people kept adding things to the platform which actually made it uneconomical to run as the XJ platform. This is what I've heard. So I mean, talking about refreshes, I do know that there's been a lot of rumour lately about iPace refreshes. I don't think anything's happening in this model yet. They've made minor tweaks. Actually, cut some bits of the product which were in the spec initially, and made them options, and it's all like cost saving stuff. A lot of the ones I've done recently. But I have heard that there's a fairly major refresh due in the next couple of years, sort of almost ground up. Which I'm interested to see how that is and how that works. I mean, there's so many rumours bounding around at the moment, and it is all rumours there, so I don't want to go too much detail on something, because it's just a little bit. Obviously, they've had Thierry Bolleri, who's taken over as the CEO, and he's basically pushing Jaguar to be an EV-only company, but at a very high end. He's not talking. I think I laughed and joked that once I heard the announcement that I probably won't be able to afford the Jaguar next time it comes out, if they do reduce this refresh, because I suspect it's going to be over 100k.
Interesting. Well, as long as they bring some other models to fill the gaps, because
if you actually look what he said, he wants to go toe to toe with the Maseratis of this world. So he's not. Looking at low end cars, and actually it makes some sense from a Jaguar point of view. I mean, if they can produce high margin vehicles in lower numbers, it's actually better for them than going to the mass market, because they've never been a mass market manufacturer. They just can't make that threshold to make that work. So if you make more bespoke cars and you compete with the Bentleys and the Maseratis as well, it's actually quite a good market to be in for that sort of car manufacturer.
And given that all those luxury car manufacturers are dragging their feet when it comes to electrification, that's really a nice gap. And obviously, Tesla's nowhere near that. And probably never will be, because
that's one thing you definitely get with an iPad. You do get the build quality, you get the luxury inside. The quality of the materials is always good. I'm less of a snob for that sort of stuff. I don't mind a bit of plastic on my dashboard, but it's certainly not going to get that with an iPace.
No, but when it comes to the choices of colors and materials, I've always been impressed whenever I walked into a Jaguar Land Rover garage. Sort of how much choice you get as somebody who's looking for cars. compared to other brands, certainly.
Yeah, you do. I mean, and certainly that's something I noticed when I was sort of glancing at some of the other cars. And the EV6, for example, is very restricted in what you can get in the colours. You can't change the interior to different colours or anything like that, which is something you'd always be able to do with a Jag. So, I mean, I think that's one of the great things about Jaguar. I mean, the one thing which I often get pushed back about me, especially from Tesla drivers, is the economy of the iPace. It's not the most economical car. Then again, you wouldn't buy a petrol or an ice Jag for its economy.
Exactly. Like, it's not a car you buy for economical driving. But then when it's electric, it's much more economical than your ice car.
I mean, I say, okay, it's not. In terms of miles per kilowatt hour, it's not the most economical electric car out there, but it still does 230 miles on a charge, and that's good enough. I mean, do it. I mean, it does mean it's a little bit more expensive to run than perhaps your car would be.
It at the end of the day, it all depends on how you drive the car,
yes,
as well. Because I'm sure there are some people who are capable of hypermiling an iPace.
Oh yeah, well I know of someone who definitely does hypermile his iPace and gets nearly 300 miles out of it on a charge. So it's
wow,
it's possible.
That is a skill, because I'm well known for not being a very chill driver when it comes to acceleration. I'm still 6 years on, and 90,000 miles of EV driving. I'm still happy to slam on it when you can. So
I describe it as that go-kart. It's more bumper car moment when you just put that foot down and it just goes.
Yes,
and the iPace particularly just goes.
Yeah, my previous I had a Nissan Leaf, and I always thought Nissan Leaf was fast, but the my car can do, there's plenty of times on the road where there's an Audi or BMW driver, because they're usually the ones stereotypical, a-holes basically on the road, and the and you have to kind of show them the way. And they're always trying to chase you up. In my car, I can't imagine what it would be like if I had an iPace. Sorry.
I was just going to say we were laughing the other day that someone in the press was talking about one of the new electric cars, and I think it was 0 to 60 in 7 seconds, and they said, well, this is a particularly slow electric car, and we just thought, when did 0 to 60 in 7 seconds become slow?
Indeed, like if you said to somebody in 80s or 70s that your car can do 0 to 60 in 7 seconds, they'll be like, wow, that's fast.
That's supercar territory.
Yeah, exactly. And nowadays everyone's bragging about 2 or 3 seconds, and to me that's just way too fast. You're not gonna. I mean, there's been cases where, because we had a Model S through EV experience, or Polar experience rather, and there's been times when I could successfully overtake a group of cars on the road, on a stretch, in that car, because it had that much power. So it is useful sometimes, but I'm sure not everyone's got the skill or kind of ability to handle it.
We are getting on the edge of what people's reaction times are. I mean, when you start getting up to 60s and sub 2s, it's beyond what most people can actually handle reaction wise.
I could argue that anything below sort of 5 or even 4 seconds is already beyond sort of anybody's ability. Because it's all great when you're ready for it, when you're kind of mentally prepared. But if you're just an sort of quote unquote innocent driver who got yourself an electric car, and I don't know if iPace has that, but the most of the electric cars that I've driven, even if you're in eco mode or sort of the restricted sort of speed acceleration mode, there's always a switch at the bottom of the acceleration pedal. If you slam it all the way to the floor, it will just give you all the beans. Regardless of the mode, and I'm sure that could be shocking to somebody who doesn't expect that.
Yeah, definitely, and the iPace really doesn't have that, because it doesn't really, even in eco mode, it doesn't really restrict the acceleration that much. I mean, it's a tiny amount of restriction. You just don't notice it really. It's more about turning off sundry equipment. I mean, it reduces the air conditioning and things like that, and slightly changes the difference between the front and rear wheels in all-wheel drive mode. At least it does now. It didn't used to. That's actually one of the changes they made when they did the updates. It actually did make a big difference on motorway driving economy. But yeah, but I think there's that classic video which did around a few months back of someone basically messing up parking big time in the iPace, sort of slamming into those cars, and that was basically because they just were taken by surprise by the acceleration.
Exactly. That's what I mean. There's certainly a big gap when it comes to EVs, where because if you buy a nice car, you're not going to buy yourself a 3-liter turbocharged whatever. Most people will just buy 1.2 liter something when they just want to diddle along slowly to the shoppings or to see their family. And there's a gap in the sort of EV market where you put a quite powerful motor, but you still restrict the acceleration curve so that the car is very efficient because you can't go faster. So you're not wasting that much energy, and you don't need a huge battery, but you will have much greater range. Everyone's still going for the sort of the oomph and the acceleration, and I get it because that's how you win people in general. But when it comes to efficiency and the range, I think there's still a massive gap when. Just to shift this, on the sort of bad side of iPace, you've mentioned that initially there was a lot of troubles with software, and Jaguar is certainly not the only company. VW had obviously recently a lot of bad stress with ID3, and it's only been sort of a couple months since they've released version 2 of the software that actually is a bit more practical. Although I could still argue it's not as cohesive and sort of well designed as it should be, but they're getting there.
But I think you have to remember that most car manufacturers are not software companies. They're not. They buy their equipment in. They used to buy components into the dashboards and the controls, and they're not used to having to produce integrated systems. Which really, when you've got an EV, particularly when you've got something which is going to do any form of assisted driving, you need to have all those integrated systems, and people expect.
Indeed.
And that's an expectation which has come from Tesla. I give total due for Tesla for that. Tesla are a software company, primarily a software company, over and above what they do with the hardware, and it shows. And other manufacturers have had to take heed, and they're now being judged on that, which they wouldn't have done before, and they're starting to try and ramp up their ability to handle software, but they haven't got those skills in place, and it takes a long time. I'm in the software industry. I know about this stuff, and it's
same.
We just had this discussion, and it's really difficult to get this right, and I think that's the big issue. But no, certainly early days there were a lot of issues with software. There's some stupid stuff on the electronics, which is not really EV specific, more Jaguar specific. There's sort of they have a bit of a reputation on that electronics, so things going on. but actually, one of the typical things which actually has affected Teslas as well, has affected other cars, and I know Tesla are now moving away from this. But one of the big issues which a lot of EVs have is the 12-volt battery.
This is where I was going with this. But before we get on, it's the also, like, everyone's talking about the Tesla being primarily a software company, but they're also kind of like other big companies out there. They're becoming more and more sort of vertically integrated companies, which is even more important than just being a software company, because you want to control everything. Because it's great. It's great to learn writing software for all your trinkets, but if you have many components that you don't control yourself, and then third party develop software for it, it's much harder to fix bugs and iron out any issues than if you have it all under your own wings.
I do think that's really actually very key with Tesla. One of the things that they're not being affected by the chip shortages as much as other people, because they've actually got their own chip manufacturing and stuff, and they've put lots of stuff out. Although they are using LG batteries for some things now, and not their own batteries, but I think that. Some of these other companies do suffer from the fact that they just bolt to give components together, and they don't control how all those components work.
Yeah, exactly. But so let's go back, because you've raised a good point about the 12-volt battery. That seems to be something that I don't think anyone would expect EVs to have a problem with auxiliary batteries. Yet somehow this little pesky battery is killing a lot of EVs, including iPaces. What's going on with that?
Well, I think a lot of the problem with the 12-volt battery is it was designed for a petrol car. It was designed for the way a petrol car can charge with the alternator, and yes, you've got a lot of battery sitting there in the big battery, in the main battery of your car, but it's actually quite difficult to get that across into a 12-volt battery in any way, and they do suffer for a lot of the time from just not being charged properly. They don't get the charging cycles they're expecting to get, and they're not designed to get. And there are now 12-volt batteries which are being, or auxiliary batteries, because some of them are actually 24-volt, which are being designed specifically for EVs. But you actually question whether we actually need them at all. Why can't we just have some sort of converter coming out of the big battery to actually do the lower voltage systems? And that's a cost. It's a cost which people don't want to, because it's an engineering cost. It's not at the moment. You can just go out and buy your 12-volt battery components. You don't have to think about it. You've got all your fuse boxes, everything. You can do exactly the same as you've always done with your ICE car. Plug it in. That's what most manufacturers did, and that's why they've had issues, because they don't get the same charging cycles as they do with an alternator, and they're designed for that, and they start to fail. And the biggest issue tends to be if the 12-volt goes flat, then nothing works, which is you end up with dead cars because you can't even move them, because everything relies on the 12 volts to get started.
Indeed. Like, well, loads of people miss kind of the point that the even though you have the big battery is off by default,
yes.
and the 12-volt battery powers any sort of safety circuitry that monitors the big battery. So it's like a chicken and egg thing. You kind of need this 12-volt battery to be able to turn on the big battery.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be a 12-volt battery. I mean, I've certainly seen some interesting potential designs using capacitors for that. So basically charging a capacitor from the big battery, which would from high volt, to taking high voltage into a capacitor is actually a lot easier than taking high voltage into a 12-volt in sort of conventional lead acid type battery, which is very different. I know now when I started seeing some lithium ion versions of the accessory batteries, and that will help. But yeah, it was definitely in the early days. It was definitely a big issue with the iPace. Lots of people were finding that was dying, but it's not just an iPace problem. I mean, I know the MGZS group, they've had a lot of issues with 12-volt batteries as well. So it's definitely
same with Kia e-Niros. They seem to be going after 2 years.
Yeah.
But so it's because the whenever I read, I think I am on the Facebook iPace group, kind of just lurking in the shadows most of the time. But every time I go in there, I seem to be reading about somebody's 12-volt battery dying. But is it really that much of an issue, or is it just a couple of people that?
It's a high percentage of the issues which occur. I mean, obviously, anything like a Facebook group, you tend to see more people post. But people don't post about they've had a lovely day driving today. They post when the car goes.
Of course.
So as a percentage of the owners, it's not a huge percentage. It is. I mean, it is probably still a higher number than most EVs out there have had. I mean, the Kia maybe not so, because I think you're pretty close with the issues I'm seeing on the Nero now. But certainly it was a very, very challenging thing to sort out there. And they've changed some components now. There's been some updates which should stop that 12-volt being drained quite so much. Part of the problem was the telemetry control unit. So this is again another thing that's come in more with modern cars, and it's not just like EVs, but it tends to be associated with EVs because it's coming around the same time as EVs are starting to take preference. Is the whole idea of over-the-air updates, which obviously you can do on the iPace. And for that, you need some sort of telemetry control. You need a phone signal. You need that, and sometimes those things actually can eat 12-volt batteries because they're on all the time looking for updates. Unless they're written and programmed properly, the firmware on those programmed properly, they can be a major issue. And that was one of the reasons that the 12-volt was draining on the iPace particularly bad.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that's fairly much fixed now. But the problem is a lot of drivers haven't had the updates, because unless you specifically go for that, go to your dealer for that update, you don't get it. It's not an over-the-air one because it can't be done over the air because it's actually updating the over-the-air components, which is a bit of
okay.
But yeah, so unless you go for your service, and we were saying this on the show, on my iPace driver show the other day. One of the issues with modern cars is we don't go in for servicing that often. So if these updates come out, say 2 weeks after you bought the car, you may not get the updates for 2 years, unless it's over the air.
That's true. But and it's also I think the primary issue is the car probably has been designed well enough to handle the topping up the 12-volt battery. It's just the 12-volt batteries themselves are not designed to have so many shallow charge and discharge cycles, because on a nice car the battery is just basically the auxiliary battery is just a big capacitor that its only job is to kind of smooth out the troughs and peaks in the alternator output, but also it needs to provide a giant amount of electricity to crank up the engine initially, and that's its kind of main job. And it gets discharged to something like 30-40% just doing that. And obviously it's not going to do that in an EV, so that becomes a problem.
Cycle. And I think the other thing with that is that 12-volt batteries do fail in ice cars as well. I mean, I had no end of problems. The last ice car I actually had with the 12-volt battery, I think I had it replaced 4 times over a 5-year period. So it's not just an EV problem, but obviously on an EV it tends to be more catastrophic because nothing works. And because it's on Kia Niro, again, like you say, you hear from people who have issues a lot, and nobody's posting how much of a lovely day they had driving their EV, unless they're new to it. Because at least on the Niro forums, we tend to hear from people who just are getting the new car and they're very excited about it, and they haven't read the manual and they don't want to read the manual, so they ask loads of questions and kind of relay all the experiences that they had for a couple of days, and then they kind of stop posting until something goes wrong. That's very, very familiar.
But that's just a human condition, isn't it? We tend to not to complain about things or boast about things, unless you're on Instagram, obviously, but that's a different medium. And it skews completely differently. So yeah, it'll be interesting what you're going to pick as your next car. I'll be really curious about that.
Yeah, I haven't made any decisions yet. I definitely wanted to test drive the EV6. I think that's on my short list. I'm even considering keeping this iPace because I absolutely love this car I've got. Even though I've had a couple of issues with it. I've had two times I've had to call out the Jaguar roadside assistance people. First time was caused by a charger not quite doing what it should have done, and ended up with a high voltage fault being detected by the car. So this is basically where the car thinks that the bodywork of the car's gone live.
That's not good.
Which it has, but it's the way that it's all down to this CCS standard not being 100%, and certain charges in the early days. And I think there has been some work on Jaguar's side and also on the charger side to stop this happening quite so much. But in the early days, you used to occasionally get this thing come up that it detected this, and of course the car at that point takes the safe route and says, "I'm not letting you drive this anymore. I'm shutting down now. You could kill yourself with this high voltage stuff." So so I had to end up stranded in middle of Norfolk, waiting for roadside assist to turn out on a Sunday evening, which is not the best time to call for roadside assistance. You're not going to get the standard Jaguar people during that time. So it was a standard AA guy who didn't really know what he was doing with an EV. And then they had to send out the low loader, and then they couldn't get the car on the low loader because obviously the wheels don't turn if it's locked in that mode. So it was all a bit of a pain to get it recovered. And then they, for some unearthly reason, although I live in Peterborough and I was halfway between Peterborough and Norwich, they decided to take it back to Norwich. So I ended up having to go and collect it about 4 weeks later. And it took them 4 weeks to diagnose the problem as well, which was really annoying. Because I know that problem could have been actually handled with a very simple reset, and I'd been able to drive it the next day. It's just back then it was early days, and people there was a lot of learning curves on this stuff, so particularly incompatibility between chargers and cars. And the only other breakdown I had, which was actually quite recently, last week, was actually not an EV problem per se. It was to do with the car's bus, and two components not talking to each other properly in the car, which could have happened on my car as well. I still find it absolutely stunning. We still rely on network technology, which was obsolete in the late 80s, to run our cars. We wouldn't run it in the IT world now, because we know it never worked properly. But it was used to talk between components and cars.
Yeah, and again, this is the problem with the industry. You've got so many manufacturers. There's a reason why all of a sudden all the cars in the world, or in Europe certainly, get something like the lane assist and sort of other such features at the same time, is because Siemens and Bosch and whoever else all of a sudden produces loads of they just produce boxes that do that sort of thing, and then everyone just integrates them with their cars.
And they have to run, and because of that, they need to integrate the standards for the buses which they use to talk to each other. But those standards have been in place for a very long time now, and they haven't really evolved, and that causes some issues. And basically what I had was two of my components were telling the car to do different things. One was telling it to put itself in reverse, and the other one was telling itself to put it in the forward. And it tried very hard to do that, being an EV.
Oh, wow.
But it wasn't a very pleasant experience.
How did it manifest itself then? What was
basically, I started to pull the car to pull forward, and then suddenly lurch backwards and lurch forward, and lurch backwards and lurch forwards, and then bang. Loud bang, which is basically, I think, just something clashing inside. I mean, it hasn't caused any permanent damage, and it was actually fixed with a software update to those components.
It's interesting. Interesting. I don't want to go on the tangent and talk about the charging issue, because it's I think my personal point of view is that it should be the car manufacturer who kind of should ensure that the car is sort of compatible with the biggest networks in the country that it's selling the car in. But it's not easy, obviously. Like it's I'm making it sound like
Jaguar,
it's easy.
They did do that with the biggest networks in the country at the time. It's just some of the ones which have come along since have not worked necessarily with it.
Yeah, but the it's funny to me, because I had a Nissan Leaf, and it, for all its faults, that car was happy. I mean, it had a chatter mode port, not CCS, but it was happy to take electricity from anything, as long as you fed it DC or AC to any sort of degree of standard. It was happy. And I've seen plenty of especially on the AC chargers in London. I've seen plenty of BMW i3 drivers and Zoe drivers stranded on the same charger that my Nissan Leaf was happy to accept electricity from.
I mean, Type 2 is an interesting one, because that's a simple standard, and it shouldn't really cause issues. I think a lot of times it's the contacts on the pins, the signal pins, which they get corroded over time, and people don't put them back properly, and they get wet and things like that. That can cause a problem. And some cars are better at reading that. Certainly the Nissan Leaf was definitely better at making good contact on that. But I think on CHAdeMO side of things, CHAdeMO had a huge advantage in that it is a proper standard. Both ends know what they've got to do, and
it's quite simple.
It's quite simple. It's quite simple but complicated. There are some, but the problem with CCS is it was a standard created by committee and was designed basically for a couple of cars. Actually, neither of which worked 100% properly with it anyway. But and then some of the component choices in it were driven by some of those members of the committee, and not necessarily the best things to have in it. So it's a difficult standard to get right, and it doesn't. And unlike CHAdeMO, which has some minimal standards for things like cable length and the like, there's nothing like that on CCS. You can basically create your own. I think there's a very short minimum standard for cable, but you basically can create any length of cable you like. Which causes problems if the car manufacturers put their charge ports in odd places.
No, interesting. I mean, I know for a fact that with the BMW i3, the AC charging problems were due to the fact that the charger on board is is very sensitive to changes in the what do you call it, in the hertz of the that come out of the charger. When it's 50 or 60 hertz, and when it varies too much, it's kind of very sensitive to that. But it also is very sensitive to changes in the voltage itself. And if you're in London or in any sort of place where there's a lot of things turning on and off at the same time, you get loads of little spikes. And as soon as the car detects that and is unhappy about it, it will just shut itself off. Whereas
sense actually, yeah.
The charger
that as a possibility, but that actually makes an awful lot of sense, especially in London.
Yeah. Whereas the charger in Nissan was obviously designed to deal with anything, and hats off to them for that, because whoever designed it in Japan, just was kind of much better at it. I don't know why. I don't know whether they had longer to deal with it, because obviously we're all kind of talking about cars that have been around for a while, but just to turn around back to iPace, it was quite, at least to me, it was quite a bit of a shock when iPace was announced. Nobody really expected that, as far as I could tell. I'm sure some people knew that it's been in the works, but they just kind of released it one day and decided to show it off to the world without any sort of, they didn't warm up the industry to that. To that possibility.
They have been exhibiting at the sort of technical industry events. Cenex, which is the sort of the low carbon vehicle event for the car construction industry, where they're sort of looking at the component industry basically. And I'd seen their skateboard design being touted there quite a few years before the iPace was actually out on the road. But yeah, in terms of what they actually did in terms of releasing to the motoring press and the Joe public, it was definitely very, very short.
yeah, indeed.
Version to release.
Because I remember, I'm sure. Well, all the OEMs are playing with different research and development programs, and I remember watching Fully Charged episodes quite a long time ago, where Robert Llewellyn was test driving. I think it was a Range Rover. That was fully electric. That was ages ago. So I'm sure as a group they've been, toying with all sorts of things. But where I was going with this, is that we just basically don't know when they're gonna push and release a new version of iPace or anything else, for that matter. It could be. We could wake up tomorrow to an announcement from Jaguar saying...
Yeah, you could indeed. And that's certainly been the way it's happened with changes to the current spec. When they changed the infotainment system, just came out. There wasn't really an announcement. It just came up on the configurator online. So one day you were configuring it with the old infotainment system, and the next day you would get the Privy Pro on. So it was...
That's almost like Tesla, just one day things just show up, and that's it. Interesting. We haven't had a chance to talk about any trips in the iPace, because I know you've done a lot of traveling in it.
Yeah, I've done a lot of traveling. So I guess the most significant trip I did in the iPace, and I've done this similarly in a Tesla as well. There's an event each year, IFA, which is the biggest electronics tech show in Europe. We cover it for the podcast I do. And so I go out there every year, and we've been sort of doing a challenge for the last few years about how to get there, who can get there the quickest or most efficiently or the cheapest or whatever. And a couple of times I've done that in electric cars, and I did it one year in the Tesla, and that was taking it on sort of the same sort of journey I'd normally do to go there in a nice car, taking it reasonably leisurely over a couple of days, sort of 2 to 3 days to get there. And that worked out really well. And actually, in fact, we beat the guy who was doing it in the petrol car, because it was a holiday weekend in Germany, and there were massive queues at the gas stations, the petrol stations, because of that. And he took longer to get petrol than we took to get charged. But that's a rare occurrence. They wouldn't happen. It just happened to be that holiday weekend that was the case. So we actually got there quicker than he did in Tesla. In Tesla, and he was I think it was a BMW of some sort. But then last 2 years ago, or actually, no, it's 3 years ago now. I always forget with the pandemic. The challenge was to try and get to Berlin from the UK in a day. We didn't quite make it because there were some major roadworks which would have stopped any vehicles getting down the road. But we got to about 10 miles outside Berlin. So we left about eight in the morning from Folkestone, and were in Berlin, just outside Berlin by eight in the evening, which is a rather long journey.
It is. I've only driven once across Europe. I've driven from Belfast, which I used to live in Belfast, to Krakow, in Poland, and that took me 2.5 days.
I have a friend who has driven from Peterborough to Wrocław in Poland in a day, but I don't think I'd ever want to do that.
No, it's something I've done once just to see how it's going to be, and it wasn't. I mean, it was interesting as a sort of novel thing, but I wouldn't do that again. I think maybe that was in the ICE car, obviously, but it took me about 8 hours to drive through Germany, and I didn't drive slow because, as you know, you can do crazy speeds in Germany legally.
And I have reached VMAX in the iPace in Germany, so 220 kilometers an hour on a very empty autobahn.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, and again, it handled very well on that. What really surprised me was actually how fast I could be going and still have auto steer running. the cruise control that went all up to about 180 kilometers an hour. It kept working, which really surprised me. I wasn't expecting that at all. But yeah, so you meant you can have a very fast but very relaxing journey through Germany.
But presumably, it's not very efficient.
No,
electricity-wise.
Basically, we were stopping for charge every hour. We were getting quite a long distance, but stopping for charge every hour. Which wasn't probably the best way to do it. Probably if we'd actually slowed down a bit, we'd probably got there slightly quicker. But why not have a bit of fun? I mean, you've got an iPace.
I mean, yeah, exactly. And Autobahn is actually one of those roads that is very safe to drive quickly on because it's been designed to, the road is curved in the corners, so your handling is very good, and there's plenty of space and visibility, and the culture is also of kind of getting out of your way when you're driving fast is there. Not something we get in the UK, sadly.
Definitely not. Although it has got worse in Germany recently. I think I found the last few times I've been out there, it's not been as good as it used to be. But yeah, I mean, but certainly that was very interesting driving through that, and the only thing we stopped us getting all the way. We did basically. I'm trying to remember how many hours driving we did. It was ended up being about 10 hours driving in a day to do the distance, and then it was just over 13 hours we were in the car overall with charging stops. And we used Ionity a lot. We used Fastnet a lot. I loved the Fastnet experience because we had the auto charge set up, plug and charge set up. But yeah, I mean, I did have a few interesting moments, some quite hilarious moments when I couldn't find a charger because they're not particularly well signposted a lot of the time. Went around at point.
So did you have to pre-plan that?
So I'd probably do it less now. Actually, I think because looking at the maps now, the every services have got loads of charges now on all the autobahns and the routes. So I don't think I would have had anywhere near as much issue planning it as I did when I did do that trip. I planned it using Better Route Planner and matched pretty much what he said on that thing. Other than I said the roadworks got in the way, which weren't on there. But yeah, the actual charging stops were really convenient. We timed charging stops up for when we were having meals and stuff, so barely noticed them, to be honest. And quite often we were actually staying longer than we actually needed to charge because just stuff. So especially with that amount of driving and at that speed as well through Germany, you need breaks from having that much concentration. So it certainly was not a burden having to charge. It actually was quite a nice thing having to charge and have a bit of a break.
I mean, that's one of the things that I always say to people who are kind of new to electric cars or they're curious and they kind of read about them not, or they're saying that they'll wait until the car charges in 5 minutes, which will never happen. The physics just the cable would have to be so thick that blimey, we're just gonna have to change our ways basically, or get much bigger batteries. But I always tell people, look, you're gonna stop anyway. You might as well just plan that into the journey. And when I stop at service stations all the time, I kind of look at other cars and how long they've been around. And you notice, the cars that have been parked around your car, if you just stop for a second and look around, plenty of them are going to be there long after you've left, because people do stop for 2 hours at services, whether because they have dogs or whether they have a family or whether they just want to, do a couple of phone calls and just stop and relax for different reasons, but they do stop for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, someone I was talking to at one of the services companies was saying that the average stop length is around about 32 minutes.
Okay.
And their services in terms of what people do. Well, 32 minutes is well long enough to charge most cars these days.
Indeed. So
yeah, and with the modern ones coming out, and we talk about the EV6 and the Ioniq 5 with that 800 volt charging they've got, then that becomes an amazing the quick ability to charge, get a few hundred miles back on, get going again. It's,
yeah, I mean, but that charging speed kind of relies on the fact that you're gonna kind of operate in the middle of the charging curve. Yeah. So you're gonna drive sort of until your car is down to about 30%, and then you're going to only top up to about 80%, and you're going to keep on doing that. So even if you have a car that can do 250 miles on a charge, you're still going to only do about 120, 130 miles, which in the UK will take you 2 hours plus.
Yeah.
Because everyone thinks that if you're driving 70 miles an hour flat out, you're going to do 70 miles in an hour, but in reality, it's not that easy. You've got the wind, you've got you're constantly moving side to side. If you have traffic, if people are blocking the middle lane, which they always do, you're going to have to shift around. And if you drive in a fast lane all the time, like some people do, you're going to be actually slower sometimes than the rest of everybody else who's driving at a more constant speed. But everyone's your average speed is going to be well below the 70 miles an hour, unless you're driving in the middle of the night and everything's empty. But that's a sort of outlier. But yeah, it's going to take you a while. So yeah, I'm looking forward actually to test driving Ioniq 5 or one of those new cars that can do such speeds of charging, to actually test drive properly. 400, 500 mile sort of run and see how much of a difference that makes. Because I think that's a very smart move to increase the voltage on the battery, and I think it was Porsche, or was it Audi, that have done it first. Well,
yeah, Porsche, Audi, basically the same
True.
Under the skin, isn't it?
True. True.
Yeah, so but they did that 800 volt at first, and then obviously Kia now. I do their platform, and the interesting about that platform is not just going to be available in these high-end cars like the Ioniq 5 and the EV6, but when they get around to the EV1 and the Ioniq 1, which is going to be much more cost-effective low-end cars, they'll still have this amazing infrastructure. So they'll be they may well be 200-mile cars, but they could charge probably in 15 minutes. And so it's because they'll have much smaller batteries, being lighter.
Yeah.
I think that's a potential game changer. I mean, I really don't. I think that there's a mentality thing here. When you talked about a lot in Joe, and we've talked about as well, but people switch from petrol cars, and they tend to think about it in a petrol way. You go to a service station, you go to your petrol station, you plug it in, you get this fuel in 15, 20 minutes, or 5 to 10 minutes, and then you go on. Whereas we don't do that. I mean, I other than doing these long trips, I just don't go to petrol stations or service stations to charge my car. I don't even go to find chargers, because most of the time my journey I can do in the UK is going to be within that 200-mile range I've got. I charge it overnight. I try to find a destination charger. And if I can charge at home, obviously I'm charging on cheapmate overnight. So it's much more like a mobile phone is the way I describe it. You wouldn't go out to find somewhere to plug your mobile phone in, and you plug it in at home.
Yeah. Again, it's just people kind of trying to pick the worst case scenarios because of either of their anxieties or they're just trying to wiggle themselves out of the conversation.
I think also a lot of people don't like change and they don't understand change as well. I mean, a lot of times people are very stuck in their ways and that's the way they think, and it's very difficult to think outside that box. And I think that's been one of the big things why a lot of people look at things like hydrogen and say that it'd be great because you just fill it up like you do a petrol car. Obviously, not taking into account all the issues with hydrogen. So I think that's where that sometimes comes from. But it's just a different way of thinking.
And hydrogen refueling takes a while as well. It's not as quick because you have multiple tanks on board of the car.
Yeah,
and there's I don't understand everything about it, but there's a pressure rebalancing and some safety checks. It takes good 10 minutes to refuel those cars. So if your EV is going to be recharged in 15 minutes, you might as well just run with it. Unless you have some. I mean, I think hydrogen's been pushed these days for mostly political reasons, because petrol companies don't want to, oil companies don't want to sort of lose the power essentially.
But also it fits in their infrastructure as well. A lot of the stuff they can do with hydrogen as easily as they can do with petrol. But it's I mean, I think anybody who knows the facts properly knows that hydrogen isn't the way to go for anything small. And by small, I mean anything on the road, because I don't think it doesn't really even work for trucks. It might
no
ships and planes, but
well, even with that, it's a the way it's a completely separate discussion. I don't want to I don't want this podcast to be 2 hours, but the battery capacity and sort of density improves so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
That this might have been a valid
actually planes, haven't we? So it's not
this might have been a conversation that was kind of valid 10 years ago, but I think today, you can buy a Tesla that has 500-mile range. I don't know in reality what it will do, but certainly on the paper it can do nearly 500 miles, and that's that's the same sort of size of a car that could barely do 200 6-7 years ago. So things have certainly moved on quite a lot. So I know of one company that the person that I had on one of the episodes is a reseller for Pipistrel, and they're building an 18 or 19 seat passenger airplane that is battery powered and purely electric. It's probably going to have an hour or 2 hour endurance, but that's plenty for a lot of destinations.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So. Good stuff.
Did I miss anything? Do you want to talk about anything else? I
think we've covered a lot, haven't we? It's been a really good chat.
Yeah. No, thank you for your time, and hope to see you around. And maybe you can ask me some questions next time on your podcast.
Absolutely. I was definitely encouraging people to listen to yours because I think it's really good.
Thank you.